Do you like your thrash metal high energy like 80s era Metallica and Slayer, but also like it heavy like modern death metal? Well, I've got the band for you. Welcome, metalheads. I'm the host of Heavy Metal Philosophy and writer for Metal Digest, John Barbas. Make sure you stick around to the end of the episode for this week's riff of the week. Do you like headbanging to face-melting brutal riffs? Let me tell you about Enforced. Hailing from Richmond, Virginia, and formed in 2016, Enforced started out as a crossover thrash band. You have to check out their first album, At the Walls. That first album, Crossover Thrash, is the perfect descriptor because it sounds like crossover thrash. Think Power Trip, think High Command, mix in some Municipal Waste and some Slayer, and that's what you got on that first album. But like all bands, as they grow, as they mature, their sound starts to separate from their peers, and that's what Enforced has done, because now they are so heavy. Their vocalist, Knox Colby, definitely still has a lot of that hardcore punk delivery, but his voice is so deep and gravelly, it really reminds me of death metal, but without the false chord screaming. It's not, oh! He's not doing Cookie Monster vocals. It's just that he's so aggressive in the way that he delivers the vocals, it winds up being heavy by default. I'm going to tell you how I discovered this band later in the episode, but first, let me tell you why you should listen to them if you're a fan of that early Metallica and Slayer. As I said, on their first album, At the Walls, it was straight up crossover thrash. Every song was direct and to the point, and high energy, pissed off sounding. But with their second album, The Kill Grid, that's when I feel like they really came into their own. The guitars are so technical. The leads are so blazing fast. If you caught last week's episode where I reviewed the new Metallica album, you will have seen that I had harsh criticisms for Kirk's guitar playing. Well, this guitar player reminds me a lot of 80s era Kirk. It's high energy, but it's well thought out and placed everywhere where he's shredding. It's like if Metallica was direct, to the point, and super pissed off. There's no like classical influence and guitar harmonies everywhere. No, they're more concerned with beating your brains in and then just have a shreddy solo with soaring whammy bar. And you know what? I'm here for it. Y'all know I do love the classical guitar harmonies and prog wankery all over the place. I am a music nerd. However, sometimes let's just keep it direct, to the point, and heavy. Sometimes I want to listen to Rivers of Nile. Sometimes I want to listen to Cannibal Corpse. But I always want to listen to Enforced. If you like that kill 'em all level of aggressiveness with the technicality of Ride the Lightning, then you need to check out the songs Skinned Alive and The Doctrine. If those two songs don't do it for you, let's talk about the way they sound like Slayer, and I'll give you some more examples. So while they do have the groove and the heaviness of that early Metallica I talked about, some of the note choices they make have that evil flavor that's more reminiscent of Slayer. A lot of the accents in between the chugs is really something more that Slayer would do versus Metallica, and the blending of that really makes for a unique sound. If you want examples of what I'm talking about, check out the songs Malignance or Curtain Fire. You really need look no further than that. But here's the great thing, and here's why I'm making this episode. This Friday, April 28th, they have a new album coming out, War Remains, and I could not be more excited for this album. Let me tell you the story of how I discovered this band, and then you'll see why I'm so high on them and why I'm so excited for this new album. If you've been listening to this podcast for a long time, then you already know I love the band 200 Stab Wounds. They're one of my favorite new death metal bands. In fact, I made an episode about my top 3 best new death metal bands, and 200 Stab Wounds was at the top of that list. It's the groove. Not only are they great at making disgusting grooves on every song, but they're masters of keeping you in that groove by systematically changing rhythms every single cadence where you might possibly start to become numb to it. Nope, they're switching it on you. And by constantly switching that groove, it stays fresh. And you can listen to 200 Stab Wounds from beginning to end, even though they're not bringing any prog elements, they're not mixing genres or doing something to shock you in any way. It's just the music is that good, and it's constantly keeping you moving. It's constantly progressing as the song goes. Well, I saw last year that 200 Stab Wounds was touring with Undeath, which is another titanic new death metal band. And I thought to myself, that's a tour I gotta see. Yeah, I put 200 Stab Wounds at the top of my top 3 new death metal acts list, but Undeath was just right outside of that top 3. I mean, they're top 5 for sure, right up there with Tombstoner. There's so many great bands. This is the best time ever in death metal, and I thought with these two bands, I mean, is there a better pairing in death metal? There could not possibly be. I'm going. Well, they weren't content to just have those two titanic bands. They also brought along Phobophilic and Enforced. And now Phobophilic is on my list of great new death metal bands that I love. But this is the thing. This is the thing that makes me love Enforced so much. Notice, I talked about death metal bands. We're talking about 200 Stab Wounds, Undeath, Phobophilic. And I said at the beginning of this, Enforced is a thrash metal band. So in terms of brutality, where did Enforced stack up amongst these 3 titanic death metal bands? Right there with them. I was blown away by how heavy it was. The style of riffing is undeniably thrash metal, but they do that same thing that 200 Stab Wounds does. They get in a groove and they lock you into it, and right when you're into it, they change it up on you and put you in a different groove. Now, I want you to picture one of those beer-swilling thrash metal bands from the 80s and how energetic their live show was, but now make them headbang super hard because they're in front of a death metal crowd. That's what I saw when Enforced was on stage. Those dudes put on one hell of a show. So as you can see, I immediately bought merch. I immediately listened to their back catalog because I was like, oh, I've got to know more about this band. Yoda! I'm recording a podcast. This is going to be a band I'm going to follow. I was that blown away by them. And that's pretty much my favorite thing in metal. I love that. When I go to a concert to see this band because I love them so much and discover this band that I'd never heard of before, and I'm like, holy shit, those guys are awesome too. That is the best. But it's not just those 2 albums that has me excited about the new album coming out this Friday, War Remains, Friday, April 28th. No. There's another reason too. Of course, they've released singles leading up to the record, and it sounds to me from those singles that they're just picking up right where they left off. Gotta check out the tracks Ultraviolence and Hanged by My Hand. Those are 2 singles coming off the new record, and and I've heard interviews with the band. They're saying that this record is going to be tight, direct, to the point, and it's going to be a little bit more personal. So that to me can only mean one thing: in your face, high energy, and pissed off. That's the way I like my metal. You know, sometimes I'm in the mood for some really beautiful guitar work, but a lot of times I just want my face melted and to bang my head. And there you have it. If you love thrash metal and you love death metal, you'll love Enforced because it's all of the best parts of both with a nice sprinkling of hardcore punk on the top, which creates for a very familiar and yet very unique sound at the same time, which is that impossible needle to thread. I can't wait to hear what the rest of this album sounds like. We'll of course talk about it this weekend on my YouTube exclusive Top 5 Best New Metal show, but don't fret, we're also doing the riff of the week since it's the podcast, and this week's riff of the week is Hanged by My Hand off the new Enforced record, War Remains, out this Friday, April the 28th, 2023. I hope you enjoy hearing this riff at the end of the episode. Click right here and you'll get another great heavy metal philosophy episode on YouTube. But most importantly, read philosophy, listen to metal. I love you.
A feral fever grows to vapid